our first question for you, Mr. Havner, is where were you when you learned of America's declaration of war?
I was on Main Street in Lincoln. After church on Sunday, that was a place that we didn't have places to go like a lot of people, so we'd meet on Main Street in Lincoln. And I was on Main Street in Lincoln, and Bonnie Taylor, I don't know whether you knew him or not, but he's about 3 or 4 years older than I am, and was ready to be drafted anyway. And he came up the street and he said, "Do you have a radio in that car?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Well, turn it on. We're in war." And that's where I heard it. And I would say it was after 1 o'clock on Sunday. I don't know how much after anything, but that's where I was when I heard it. And I heard it from Bonnie Taylor, and we did turn the radio on, and they told about it. And of course, the war wasn't declared yet, but he felt sure we were in war. Oh, well, I said, time I get 21, it is sure to be over with Japan. But I had thought of enlisting before, but I did go with the second group of teenagers when they lowered the draft to 18. I went with the second group from Lincoln County.
So were you drafted or did you enlist?
Yes, I was drafted.
Okay. And what year was that?
43.
Okay. So you were in the service from 43 until when?
46.
Okay.
3 years and 16 days. And I could give you the hours about.
And how old were you?
19.
Okay. So when you were drafted, what branch of service did you go into?
I went in the Air Force.
Really?
And that's what I had requested, and I had planned to enlist. A group of us had planned to enlist when they froze enlistments. And they said that you wait now till you're drafted, and they'll assign you to a place that you needed the most. But I knew some people that was there, and I had requested the Air Force, and some of the others that went in with me requested the Air Force, and some of us got it, and some of us didn't.
What was appealing about the Air Force to you?
The best branch of service. If I had to go in now, I was young enough to go in, I would choose the Air Force.
What was your rank?
Sergeant.
Sergeant? What about some of your major duties in the service as a sergeant?
Well, I was trained in the remote use of the planes, and there's only 3 of the planes had the remotes, and that was the B-29, the A-26, and the P-61. 3 planes use the remotes, and my duty was to see that the remotes were functioning as they should before the plane left for a mission. And they would tell me that plane number 276 will be leaving at 10 o'clock in the morning, and 278. And I checked to see that the remotes were working before the planes left out, but we gave a report of what planes was going on that particular mission and what time they had to be ready the next day. So I would check. That was an easy job, but it's an important job. So I checked to see that they was working proper, and then when they go into combat, well, they knew they had them working.
What sort of training did you receive before you were sent in?
Well, they trained for the remote conditions was 4 months, and I had already had armament training before that, and that armament is the guns, and I was 9 weeks on that. So that's another advantage of the Air Force. They train you, and most of the time you can get in the areas of training that you want to get in. Not every time they'll tell you what they need you for sometimes, but sometimes they'll let you choose.
Did you ever see combat?
Yes, I did. So as much of it as I wanted to. I got the pleasure of sleeping on the ground and all of that. So it was an experience.
That's a good way to describe it, an experience. Where were you stationed?
When you got an assignment, most time you didn't know where you was going. If you went by train, maybe away across the United States, and if you go by bus, and I have ridden the back of a army truck from one place to another. I moved from Oklahoma City to Jonesboro, Arkansas, and rode the back of a truck. But they didn't move us too much in the back of a truck. But you didn't know where you was going when you got on. The movement was secret to an extent that they didn't tell you. They didn't even tell us when we was going overseas, but we knew we was in an overseas group from Columbia, South Carolina. So when I got on the train there, I knew I was going overseas, but I didn't know where we was going. But we went to Seattle, Washington, and that's where I got on the ship to go overseas.
And where were you stationed overseas once you got there?
Well, jumped from island to island until we got to Okinawa. Okinawa was the large island that was captured from the Japs, and that was our last jump to go into Japan proper. And we were already under training in Okinawa for an invasion of Japan proper. And they said that would take place probably the 1st of November. So we didn't know that much about it, that we were making plans to invade Japan in November. So we didn't have to. The war ended.
Okay, so that was the last year.
After dropping of the bomb, I saw the plane that carried the atomic bomb to end the war for us.
Wow.
It came in and landed on our airstrip. And, of course, we didn't know what it was carrying. And our airstrip was not supposed to be large enough for that big a plane, but they came in, landed, and filled up fuel, and took off the next morning at 10 o'clock. And, of course, that's what ended the war, was the dropping of the atomic bomb. Mm-hmm. So, of course, we had a good party after that. Then we knew we was going to get to come home, maybe. But I was lucky. I liked the few units having enough to come home in the first group, so I got to go to Japan and stay for 4 months of occupation Japanese, and I enjoyed those 4 months.
My next question was...
And they treated us nice. I don't believe we could have treated them that nice at the end of the war, but they were good to us.
The next one was, what were your first impressions when serving in a foreign country? And that kind of ties into how were you treated in the foreign country as well?
Well, the Japanese treated us, I would say, extra good. I was there over Christmas of 45, and They even gave the servicemen a Christmas party. I remember that was in my station was about 25 miles out of Tokyo, but we could go into Tokyo when we wanted to. So they gave the servicemen a party for Christmas, which was I thought sounded kind of unusual, but they planned it.
What about how did you communicate with loved ones back home?
Letters. They may take a week to get from overseas back home, or longer, but that's the way we communicated. Well, in fact, everybody didn't have a telephone like they do now. We didn't have a telephone in our house. So I called home one time while I was in service, and they were visiting a uncle in town, and he had a phone. So I called them at their house. So that's the only time I talked to my parents during my stay in service was one phone call. And I was gone 21 months before I got home, first time for a pass.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went in, I stayed in.
What about your most memorable or frightening experience?
Mm-hmm. I guess during night air raids would probably be the most scary time because, see, the Japs was dropping suicide bombs every night somewhere, and we had some large ships anchored right close to us. And, of course, laying there on the ground looking up in the air and the sky lighting up is not a nice time to sleep. But we didn't have any other place to go.
Mm-hmm.
Except just lay there on the ground.
When and where were you when you learned that the war was over?
On Okinawa. I'd say my happiest time was when the Japs had waved the white flag.
Yeah,
That meant they came back. They came back with the bombs still on the plane, and didn't drop them. And they said that every place that they had as first choice, second choice, and third choice, they got the white flag. So they came back with the bombs on the plane. So that was a happy feeling.
Mm-hmm. So what was the greatest thing you learned during your time in the service?
I guess this say that everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
You meet people, and I would say meeting people and seeing how alike instead of how different we were.
So how did your military experience affect your life?
Well, it took 3 years that I was away. I had 2 years of college before I went in service. I came back and finished college. And I would say that I maybe learned more in those 3 years being out than I would have been, but it did hold me back 3 years.
What did you do after you graduated?
I started teaching. So I spent 35 and a half years in schoolwork. I taught. I was principal. I was assistant superintendent. So I did many different things. My last 25 years, I worked out at the county office.
So what message would you give the youth of today?
Well, I would, by all means, encourage education. Go as far as you can. We still have dropouts in school that we shouldn't have, but we do. So I would certainly encourage them to stay in school and get their education.
All right, I think that's all the questions I had for right now. I'll let you know if anything changes. And I really do appreciate your time today. and for sharing your stories.
I've enjoyed talking with you.
Oh, thank you so
And
much.
I hope it will be able to help to the young people.
Carol Howell from the Lincoln County Historical Association. I am proud to be able to give you a little snippet of one of our latest accessions, and that is the John Reynolds accession. When we get an accession, that means we get the collection, usually from the family, of everything that this person wants us to preserve. And in this case, it is the story of a soldier, an Army soldier in World War II, who actually was quite a hero, and he was from Lincolnton. And according to President Eisenhower, who was then General Eisenhower, he actually was, I would say, instrumental with two other men for saving the Ludendorff Bridge, which was the last bridge across the Rhine River, that saved it and probably shortened the World War II by 6 months. Now, John Reynolds grew up in the Wampum Mill Village, just right over the couple blocks from Main Street, on D Street. There were 11 kids in the house. They lived in a mill house. So he didn't have a real auspicious start. But he left school and joined the Civilian Conservation Corps when he was just about 16 years old. He finished his stint with the CCC, and then he decided to re-enlist. And he went in the Army, and it just happened that he was in Germany at the time, and there was a push by the German Army to blow up every bridge that crossed the Rhine River so that the Americans could not cross. And so mile by mile and bridge by bridge, they blew up the bridges. And it just so happened that they were at the last bridge. It was the Ludendorff Bridge. It was the bridge that crossed the Rhine River to Remagen, which was actually would be a pretty good save for the Americans if they could cross the river. It just so happened that the Germans had been trying to blow up that bridge for days and days and days and had not been successful. They had blown a big chunk out of it, but they had not been successful in blowing up the Ludendorff Bridge. It was a pretty sturdy bridge. It had two big brick towers on either end, and the Germans held it. That day, the Army was able to run the Germans off from the bridge long enough that they could try to cross, but they found that the Germans had loaded the bridge up with explosives, and that they were planning on giving it another try about 4:30 that afternoon. So 3 soldiers, Lieutenant Timmerman and Lieutenant Dorland, and Staff Sergeant Dorland and Staff Sergeant Reynolds, who was our hero, ran onto the bridge under sniper fire and cut the wires and threw the dynamite over the bridge into the water. And that's how they were able to seize the bridge, and then the American Army could rebuild the bridge and drive their tanks over the bridge. The sad part about all the, I should tell you that just a couple days after that, they were awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. These 3 men were awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. They're in the field, and they were able to, they got that award, and he mailed it home to his mother with a letter and said, "Hold this for me." Now, about 2.5 months later, our Staff Sergeant Reynolds was killed in action. And I want to show you something you may not have ever seen. Back in the day, Lincolnton had a woman who delivered telegrams on bicycle. Her name was Miss Jessie, and she delivered this telegram to his mother, and that told her that her son had been killed in action. Now you can imagine the shock of getting a telegram like that to tell you that one of your children had been killed in action. This is the Distinguished Service Cross and the Purple Heart that he received. This is the medal that he received in the field that he mailed home to his mother and said, "Keep this for me." Which we actually have that letter here on with the collection. And then after he passed away, she received the Purple Heart. Now Miss Reynolds, she actually had 4 boys who were soldiers in the Army. And this, for example, the family has given this to us. You see the 4 stars. What they would do is the family would hang this in their window to tell their neighbors that they had 4 soldiers in the Army. And that was pretty common for, at that time, to hang a little flag in the window and let people know that you had soldiers in the Army. Now, of course, his mother got his effects, came back in the mail. She got his hat that he wore, and she got his wallet. His wallet actually has some foreign money in it. I guess he got that as souvenirs when he was overseas. That looks like an American bill. However, it was kind of odd looking, but there it is. But she got this all back. This is French francs. Here's the follow-up to that, and this is why this is very relevant to Lincoln County. As you cross the bridge, 321, over the big highway going toward Boger City, you will see a sign on the side that says the John A. Reynolds Bridge. And it was dedicated to John Reynolds. And this is the news story that was in, and that's all his brothers and sisters, their surviving brothers and sisters. And they dedicated that bridge. The Department of Transportation of North Carolina dedicated the bridge in his memory, which I think is very, very appropriate because he saved a bridge, and now he has a bridge named for him. And he was a hometown hero. So we are delighted to have this collection that was given by George Reynolds, his younger brother, to preserve for him and their family. So we feel very honored that we have that collection to share with you.
Hello everyone, I'm Emily with the Lincoln County Public Library, and weren't those some incredible stories we heard today from Mr. Hebner and Miss Howe regarding American heroes from Lincoln County? Well, we need to figure out some more information about World War II, so let's dive into some facts. To do that first, we must learn what was the cause of World War II. At the end of World War I, Germany, after their loss, had to sign the Treaty of Versailles. This was a peace agreement that made Germany give up the land they had invaded. They had to surrender their military and weaponry, which meant no tanks, no submarines, and no air force, and they had to pay back all the damages. In 1933, Hitler was voted into power, and he rebelled against the Treaty of Versailles. Germany created an alliance with Italy and with Japan to form the Axis powers. Germany completely broke the Treaty of Versailles and invaded Poland in September of 1939, which caused the declaration of war from Great Britain and France. This was also the time of the Holocaust, where 11 million Jewish people and others lost their lives at concentration camps controlled by Nazi troops. Now, America was not yet willing to join the Second World War, having just recovered from the First one and the Great Depression. However, they did begin to sell arms and weaponry to their allies, and they began a peacetime draft in September of 1940. The peacetime draft allowed America to build their army. Now we fast forward to December 7th, 1941, which we learned in our last video was when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor. Franklin Roosevelt, the current president at the time, and Congress declared war on Japan the very next day. America joined the Allied powers, which included Great Britain and Soviet Russia, which were the two largest powers, but it also included Australia, Canada, Brazil, Mexico, India, Greece, and many other countries. As we learned from our earlier guest, the U.S. troops helped in two different theaters. In the European theater, the U.S. helped defend European countries and Northern African countries from invasion. Major battles here include D-Day, or Operation Overlord. This was on June 6, 1944, where Allied powers invaded France at Normandy and forced Nazi troops back into Germany. The Battle of the Bulge in December of 1944 allowed Allied forces to invade Germany. In March 1945, troops were able to cross the Rhine, which then entered German headquarters and led to the German surrender on May 8, 1945. In the Pacific Theater, the strategy was called island hopping, which involved taking Japanese-controlled islands one by one and converting them to bases for bombers to use against Japan. Major battles here included the Battle of Midway in June of 1942. Despite the war with Germany ending, the war with Japan was still going on. President Truman approved the dropping of atomic bombs on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and then Nagasaki was bombed on August 9th. This led to Japan's surrender on August 14, 1945. World War II lasted from 1939 to 1945 and was the most geographically widespread conflict ever. It is estimated that 10 million American troops served, and of that 10 million, 235,000 troops were killed and 592,000 troops were injured or wounded. Now that we know all of the facts about World War II, let's get into some of the stories covered in Lauren Tarsh's I Survived series. The first one being I Survived the Nazi Invasion 1944. In a Jewish ghetto, Max Rosen and his sister Zena struggle to live after their father is taken away by Nazis. With barely enough food to survive, the siblings make a daring escape from Nazi soldiers into a nearby forest. They are brought to a safe camp by Jewish resistance fighters, but soon bombs begin to fall all around them. Can Max and Zena survive the fallout of the Nazi invasion? And the second book, featuring World War II stories in this series, is I Survived the Battle of D-Day 1944. 11-year-old Paul's French village has been under Nazi control for years. His Jewish best friend is missing and food is scarce, and there doesn't seem to be anything Paul could do to make it better. Until he finds an American paratrooper in a tree outside his home. The soldier says the Allies have a plan to end Nazi control for all, but he needs Paul's help. This is Paul's chance to make a difference. Soon he finds himself in the middle of the biggest invasion in history. Can he do his part to turn horror into hope? If either of these books sound interesting, or both of them do, you can check them out from your local library. I hope you enjoyed this video today and that you learned a lot. We'll see you next time. Bye!